Good evening. We're going to call to order the Colerain Township Board of Zoning Appeals meeting for Wednesday, August 22nd, 2018. We'll begin our meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance. So please stand. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Welcome again. In the event that you have not had an opportunity to bring an appeal before the Board of Zoning Appeals, I'm going to do a brief summary of what is about to happen this evening. There are two components to my comments. The first will be a listing of the primary functions of the board, and the second will be a sequence of activities for this evening. Primary functions of the BZA are to hear appeals from the administrative interpretation of the zoning code, such as the administrative denial of a zoning permit, to hear requests for variances, to hear requests for conditional uses, and finally, hear requests for expansion or changes to a non-conforming use or building. The sequence of events will be: the staff will present an overview of each case. The presentation will include photos, diagrams, and other materials pertinent to the case, and they will also make a recommendation to the board as to the disposition of the case. The chairman will next open the hearing to the appellant to present his or her case. Following this, anyone who is opposed to the appeal will be allowed to speak. After comments for and against the appeal have been heard, the chairman will close the public comment portion. Each board member will then address questions to the appellant, staff, and as appropriate, those opposed. After questions have been answered to the satisfaction of the board, the chairman will ask for a motion to approve or deny the request, and the vote is the final action of the board. Now, housekeeping. For the public, please make all comments from the podium. All testimony is transcribed, and it is important that the transcriber hear your name and address. The nature of the BZA is quasi-judicial. Respect for and by and for every participant is paramount. The chairman reserves the right to excuse from the hearing anyone displaying disruptive behavior. There are three cases this evening. If you are going to present comments, I see everyone has filled out this sheet. If you have not filled it out, when you do your presentation, I will ask you to complete that. Let's do a roll call, please.
Ms. Wilson.
Present.
Mr. Bartold.
Here.
Mr. Price. Mr. Roberto.
Present.
Mr. Reiniger.
Present. We do not have an alternate tonight, so the board will operate with 4 board members when we have a quorum. At this point, I'm going to ask anyone who is going to testify to stand and be sworn in. Raise your right hand. Okay. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that you will tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in matters before the Board of Zoning Appeals? Say, I do. Thank you very much. The next item on the agenda is a hearing of appeals. And the chair is going to ask for a changing of the sequence of appeals. And I will ask the board's approval. I'd like to move the BZA 2018-011, which is a request for a fence variance, to the first item on the agenda, and then we will proceed with the other 2 items in their printed order on the agenda.
I'll make a motion to that effect.
I'll second that.
Is there any discussion on a change? Hearing none, all in favor, roll call vote, please.
Ms. Wilson.
Aye.
Mr. Bartold.
Yes.
Mr. Roberto.
Aye.
Mr. Reiniger.
Aye. And if the staff would then present BZA 2018-00011, it's a request for a fence variance, section 12.8.1. Location is 3598 Ripple Grove Drive. The applicant/owner is Laura Fox and the R. Patrick Conway. And staff presentation, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The request before you this evening is for a variance to allow for a 6-foot privacy fence in a front yard. The property is located at the northwest corner of Ripple Grove Drive and Silva Drive, just south and immediately adjacent to the Northgate Mall site. You can see on the screen that this is one of 2 sidewalk connections from this neighborhood into the Northgate Mall site. This is the more easterly connection. On your screen there, you see that there is outlined in red to the north of the properties. It is an existing 8-foot privacy fence. And across the stub street there on Silva is actually a 5-foot tall chain link fence that does have an opening on the eastern side of that for a sidewalk walkway connecting the neighborhood again to that Northgate Mall site. The proposed fence is highlighted there in yellow to come out into the front yard along Silva Drive, as well as creeping up about halfway on the side of the structure there. Just a little closer look at that, and then what you see highlighted in white there is the front yard setback. That dashed line does identify where a 6-foot privacy fence would be allowed per the code. So in this image here, looking into the site, this is standing on Silva Drive, looking into the site. You can see where that canopy is behind the house is approximately where the code would allow for a 6-foot privacy fence to run along that portion of yard there. It's the approximate location. The applicant is seeking to create a more substantial barrier between the walkway and the property. Several of the reasons given by the applicant for the variance request could be resolved without the granting of this variance. 2 other additional reasons given by the applicant. One was the AC unit, wanting that to be fenced in. That could be fenced in with a 4-foot tall and 50% open fence for security purposes there. And one of the other reasons that the applicant gave for this was to prevent people from looking into one of the bedroom windows there. That window is actually 6 to 8 feet off of ground level, so a 6-foot privacy fence would not actually screen that window. The window would actually be above that fence that's being requested. A couple other images of this walkway. The subject property is on the right of this image, enclosed inside that 4-foot chain link fence, and that walkway back into Northgate Mall parking lot. Here's another image of that walkway and the privacy fence that runs along the back of all of these properties. To give you an idea of what this might mean for the neighborhood, this is an image of the other stub street and walkway that goes back into Northgate Mall parking lot from Wilcox Drive. This is the pedestrian connection there. So if granted here, the same consideration might be given to these properties as well. I do want to point out that the properties on Wilcox Drive actually face Wilcox Drive. So they do act, for all intents and purposes, as the front yard. If you were to talk about having 2 front yards, this would be the acting front yard on these properties. And there's an aerial view of then Wilcox Drive, which looks very similar to the conversation we're having about Silva Drive. Staff findings is that the fence height variance requested is substantial, since the zoning resolution prohibits privacy fences in the front yard of principal buildings. The granting of the variance would grant a consideration that is not available to other property owners in the neighborhood. The property in question would likely yield a reasonable return without the variance. The granting of the variance would probably not have a negative impact on neighboring property, but it would create that precedence to allow for privacy fences in front yards if requested by similar properties. And approval of the fence variance would not affect the delivery of government services. There are no unusual topographic or site configuration issues related to the property, which would prevent the reasonable application of front yard regulations. The express nature of the hardship is based on the adverse relations between the neighbors and not a physical attribute of the property. And by taking into consideration the benefits to the applicant if the variance is granted, weighed against the potential detriment to the health, safety, and welfare of the neighborhood and broader community, staff finds that substantial justice would be done not granting the variance for a front yard privacy fence. Staff's recommendation is denial of the variance request, and I'd be happy to answer any questions the board might have regarding this request.
Board questions for the staff? Is the representative from for this case here, either Laura Fox or John Kroger? If you'd come up to the podium and state your name and address, please.
My name's Laura Fox, 3598 Ripple Grove Drive.
Thank you. And what comments would you care to make about your application?
We are requesting it not only just for I know that the back window is 6 foot high, but they're pulling chairs up to my daughter's window. My dogs cannot be in the backyard by themselves without people throwing pop on them, walking by, throwing things at them. The shooting that happened 2 years ago, they were standing right at my fence where my children live. And the variance coming up would protect my kids, it would protect my animals just a little bit better. These kids come through, they throw stuff in the yard, they torment my dogs, they hit them. I've had to call the police. They've been tried to be stabbed before. And it would help out a lot for my animals not to be mistreated like they are. I have a 10-year-old and a 7-month-old puppy that is being really horribly mistreated by the people that walk by that fence.
Thank you. If there are questions from the board, we'll ask you to come back up. Mr. Kroger, do you wish to make a comment?
I agree with everything that she said.
Please state your name and
My
address.
name is John Kroger. I live at 3602 Ripple Grove Drive, right across the street from her. Our backyards face each other. And I can tell you everything she says is true. People go by back there. They've climbed her fences. They do mischief in her yards. They harass the dogs. And they throw trash and litter everywhere. And at the end of our street, you can't believe the inventory of stuff that I pick up every week back there. From raunchy practical jokes to condoms, anything else you want to imagine. People go back there during the night and all sorts of things happen. And I'm in favor of her raising the fence level there. Keep people out of her yard. People get in her yard to create mischief, and they harass the dogs like she said. And I'll be very happy if she gets the variance that she wants. Help improve our neighborhood. I'd have a fence like that of my own, but I'm very much in favor of her getting the request she wants.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Is there anyone here for opposition? If not, I'll ask for a motion to close the public comment.
So moved.
The motion's been made. Is there a second?
Seconded.
Made and seconded. Vote by the board. Roll call, please.
Ms. Wilson,
Aye.
Mr. Bartolt,
Yes.
Mr. Roberto,
Yes.
Mr. Reiniger.
Aye. Very good. Okay, questions from the board. Mr. Roberto.
I guess I have a question for staff. I mean, could they just close that entranceway from Northgate Mall to that neighborhood?
Who do you mean by they?
Well, it's township property that's abutting to. So who's responsible for the fence that's along that border?
If it's township property, it would be the township that would be responsible for it.
Could we not just continue that fence that's a privacy fence so that it blocks the entire entranceway? They can't cut through there.
That is something that I think the township could consider. You may want to also consider that this is a very strong pedestrian connection through the neighborhood, and there is quite a bit of discussion about the redevelopment of the Northgate Mall site at this time. You may want to have further discussions about that kind of disconnect if the township were to move forward on that.
But if the connection is causing problems for the residents of the neighborhood, then how can we resolve that? If we're kind of creating the problem by allowing put that pathway through there, how can we then, as a township, resolve that problem besides giving them a fence?
I don't know that that's something that I can answer for the township
So,
at
you
this
see where
time.
my thought process is there, because we are creating somewhat of that opportunity for that to happen, because we're allowing those kids that are most likely coming from the cinemas, is what I'm suspecting, crossed into the neighborhood, which probably they live in, and, they're causing.
I don't know that staff is going to advocate for the closure of a major pedestrian connection to one of the largest community assets.
Okay, that answers my question. Thank you. I don't have any question for the.
One for the applicant. In lieu of what you're proposing, you're totally against making it code compliant and just putting it from the corner of the house back?
If you make comments from the podium, please.
Sorry, I just had surgery a week ago. It would cut off almost half of my yard. I mean, there's a whole section, if I ran it from the back of the house, I would lose all that. And that's where we have to cut and we have to do everything. I would lose all that part of the yard.
Well, theoretically, I mean, it's still your yard, but that's one way to get around, this issue, is to put it in as per the zoning regulations.
Just where the fence is now, it's at that edge, and we're just wanting to take it up and put a normal privacy fence where the fence already is.
Yes, but it's in your, per code, it's the front yard, that's what's not allowed.
I know, and it's our side yard to us.
Right, yeah, it looks like a side yard, but it's a front yard. So I was just curious if you were willing to,
I'd rather
Kinda,
not lose that much of my yard.
right?
I mean, because that's where our fence already is.
Okay, thanks.
I'll share a perspective. You don't need to come back up to the podium. First, I have to compliment you. The maintenance on the fence that you have is very good. The weeds are down, and you've done a nice job of doing that. The other thing I would share with you is that chain link fence is basically an open fence. And what you're asking for is a closed high privacy fence. My primary concern, although it does violate the zoning code for a front yard, is if there is pedestrian traffic there at dark hours of the night, who is going to replace or repair the inevitable spray painting that's going to happen on the outside of that fence, which will then create an eyesore and also a maintenance headache for you.
Me and my landlord will be responsible for that. I have no problem repainting the fence.
Yeah.
If something like that were to happen. I just want it to be safer for my animals and for my children.
Although the BZA is not in the business of providing solutions, one was offered, which was the planting of a evergreen hedge or a planting which will actually give you more height than the requested privacy fence and would enhance your yard as an alternative to a solid fence. And is that something you would consider doing?
If I cannot get a privacy fence, then yeah, I would consider doing something like that. I would rather have the privacy fence, just because when the shooting happened, they were standing right there. We could hear them from sitting downstairs where I sit outside. We don't smoke in my house. So I sit outside. I could hear the kids talking as they were shooting. They were all standing, they all clamoring right there at the end. They smoke weed, they do everything.
Okay.
It's just a nuisance.
I had one more thought. So for staff, she could keep the chain link fence that's there and still put a privacy fence in per zoning, from the edge of the corner of the house back, basically have two fences with a gate or something.
She would need a variance to have a duplicate fence, but if you granted that kind of variance, then yes, that would be the case.
I'm just thinking you could have a privacy fence where I mentioned before with a gate or an opening in it. And maybe during the night or whatever, the dog doesn't go back where the chain link fence is, but you still have this privacy fence for privacy. But that was just a thought.
Any other questions from the board?
I don't
Okay.
have any questions, I guess more of a comment.
Yes, ma'am.
For the applicant. It seems to me that, just based on what I've seen throughout the neighborhood, that those evergreens actually would provide even better protection that you're looking for. It's hard to throw things over a tree. It's hard for them to try to do things to your dog through a tree. My hope is that you would consider that, because it's kind of hard for us to grant a variance when the zoning rules don't allow for it. And I agree with the sentiment that it's a little concerning that it's not your fault that this is happening, and that's where my heart goes out to you, because it's not your fault. And I get it, but I'm just hoping that you'll consider the other options, because, essentially this is.
It will be determining on the land.
Okay.
He's agreed to put up a fence if I get the variance. I have to check with him.
Okay. Yeah, and if he's willing to put up a fence, I don't see why he.
He looks at the fence being something permanent.
And the trees would be prettier, just like we were saying earlier. But I just wanted to just drop that thought in your mind.
If there is no other questions from the board, I'll ask for a motion to approve or deny the variance request for this applicant.
I'll make a motion to deny the variance.
Okay, motions have been made to deny the request for variance. Is there any discussion or a second?
I'm having a hard time with this one.
I'm not seconding it.
I don't want to second it either.
If there isn't a second, the motion will die and the denial will stand. Is that correct, Mr. Solomon?
No.
Okay.
There has to be a decision made, either granting or denying the variance. So another motion can be contemplated by the board if someone makes that.
I'm sorry.
Since there was no second, another motion needs to be, I guess, made as
Okay.
far as.
Can we table this, so that she can go and talk with her landlord? Because it seems like we don't know what her options are outside of, she was intending for the fence itself, but, there's a suggestion about there are a couple of suggestions. So I feel for her, and I think it's like.
I'll bite it. I'll make the motion to approve the variance as has been submitted. I mean, to me, it's a backyard. I mean, the house faces the other way. I know our zoning code said something else, and I don't necessarily, I've argued differently on this. It's still her backyard. So in my opinion, it should be allowed, just for that reason. And so it's causing, and she's got a hardship. I mean, people are causing her problems. This would solve that hardship. And
So-
it's nothing of our own doing.
We have a motion, the first motion died for lack of a second. Is there a second on a motion to approve the fence?
I made the motion to approve the fence, so I've already made the motion.
Is there a
Just need
second to that motion?
Right there, because I don't want to.
There is no second. That motion will also.
I'll make a second.
Okay. The motion has been made to approve the request for a privacy fence in a front yard and seconded. We'll have to do a roll call vote.
Ms. Wilson,
Aye.
Mr. Bartolt,
Yes.
Mr. Roberta,
Yes.
Mr. Reiniger.
Nay. All right, the motion carries. Thank you very much. Move on to the next case. The next case before the board tonight is BZA 2018-009. It's a request for a variance for a sign cabinet on a non-conforming sign. And the sections that we need to address are section 15.3, section 15.8.3, bracket C, section 15.8.3, bracket D, bracket 1, section 15.8.3, bracket D, bracket 2, and section 15.12.2, bracket C. The location is 7671 Colerain Avenue. The applicant owner is David Biddle, Triangle B Holding Company, Ltd. Staff presentation, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So all of those numbers and letters that you just stated essentially are articulating a request for a variance from size, setback, and height on an existing non-conforming sign. The proposal will cause the loss of the legal non-conforming status of this sign at 7671 Colerain Avenue. Very quickly on your screen here, this is looking west across Colerain Avenue to where the sign is located, subject property. From the street view, you can see the sign clearly at the top there, out at the street. 3 major panels there, on top being for the pawn shop, and then you see a red sign below and a yellow and white sign below that. This is looking across the street eastward to 7600 Colerain Avenue, which is the future Duke site. And then you can see closer view of 7671 signage there. What I would like to point out is behind all of this signage, all of that non-conforming signage along Colerain Avenue in this Groesbeck corridor. This is, non-conforming signage is something that has been making progress, I think, in other sections of the Colerain Avenue corridor, but not necessarily the Groesbeck area. So I think that's something to consider in this case. The existing sign is set back approximately 4 feet from the right-of-way, where 10 feet is required, is approximately 17 feet in height, where 15 feet is the maximum allowed. And the size of the permanent signage here is 141.5 square feet, where 58 square feet is allowed. Add on top of that the additional illegal temporary signage that you see with the We Buy and Loan on Firearms signage banner between 2 sign poles there at the bottom of the 3 panels, and then also out closer to the street, the sandwich board type temporary signage there. Both of those are illegal temporary signage, in addition to the already non-conforming signage on the property. The request before you is to replace what is now highlighted on your screen, both the panels as well as the cabinet on this portion of the signage. According to the applicant, it is deteriorated and does need replacement. Further detail on this request is to keep the top 2 sign panels up there. The upper 2 cabinets total 104 square feet. Those 2 panels alone are still well above the 58 square feet that are allowed. And then what would be the replaced added cabinet is requested to be 37.5 square feet. So again, the proposal is to keep those top 2 signs, the blue and then the red, and replace what is there in white and yellow. And here's an image looking north on Colerain Avenue. You can kind of better see some of that illegal temporary signage near the ground here. The zoning certificate was denied because of the nonconformities within the existing sign and the structural replacement of that cabinet does cause the loss of legal nonconforming status on this sign. The text that you see on the screen there is directly from the applicant's application, and their proposal again is to structurally change a nonconforming sign. Additionally, there is nonconforming signage along the building, including temporary banner signs as well as those triangle flag signs. Another image of the front of the property. This is just the one business facing the front, facing Colerain Avenue. All of the other businesses the fronts run along the north side of this building facing the parking lot. Wanted to show you just north of this property, a neighboring property signage that was recently replaced. I believe it was late last year. You'll see in the left image there, the sign was significantly damaged, I believe, by a car running into it. And the property owner chose to replace that sign in a conforming fashion, 10 feet from the right-of-way, within the size and height requirements. So we're seeing movement in this we are starting to see movement in this corridor towards more conforming signage. So all of those letters and numbers that Mr. Reininger stated earlier are kind of laid out here. Section 15.3 requires that compliance with the sign regulations for signs erected, placed, or maintained within the township. The section 12.12.2C does articulate the loss of the legal nonconforming status of the sign when the structure or size of a sign is altered in any way except towards compliance with the zoning resolution. 15.8.3C requires that the sign be 10 feet back from the right-of-way. The requested variance is for a reduction of that minimum by 6 feet. Section 15.8.3D1 restricts the height of the ground sign to 15 feet, and the existing sign is proposed to remain at 17 feet. So it's 2 feet of additional sign height. And then section 15.8.3D2 restricts the size. In a B2 district, the size is restricted to a half a square foot for each lineal foot of lot frontage. Lot frontage is just over 115 feet, which caps the sign size at 58 square feet. And we've kind of been through this already in this presentation, but those upper two cabinets are 104 square feet, and the additional cabinet would then be 37.5 square feet for a total of 141.5 square feet, which exceeds the maximum allowed by 83.5 square feet. Staff finding is that the property in question would likely yield a reasonable return without the variance. The property can be reasonably identified with signs meeting current zoning regulations. Variance request is substantial since the existing the existing sign is non-conforming in multiple respects, and the proposed sign is 240% larger than what is currently allowed in the code. The granting of the variance would grant a consideration that is not available to other property owners in the neighborhood. Granting of the variance would probably have a negative impact on neighboring property and would create a precedent to allow for sign variances if requested by neighboring properties. The addition of non-conforming signs would add to sign clutter in the neighborhood. Approval of the sign variance would not affect the delivery of government services. There are no topographic issues related to this property which would constrain the reasonable application of the sign regulations without additional expenses. And by taking into consideration the benefit to the applicant if the variance is granted as weighed against the potential detriment to the health, safety, and welfare of the neighborhood and broader community, staff finds that substantial justice would be done by not granting the variance for the replacement of the non-conforming sign cabinet and face panels. Staff's recommendation is denial of the variance requests.
Thank you. Any immediate questions by the board to the staff before the appellant speaks? Is there someone here to represent? Oh, there you are. State your name, please.
Yeah, it's Justin Scalf. I'm with One Stop Signs. I'm acting as agent representative for David Biddle. I'm located at 2502 State Route 131, Goshen, Ohio, 45122. The property in question is located at 7671 Colerain Avenue. David is property owner in this case. He's also present this evening. So if you guys have any questions about maybe like the history of the site or any context of the neighborhood, it might be best directed towards him. I will be acting as both agent and installer, so the contractor on site. My business will be ultimately do the installation on the new product if it's proposed or if it's approved. Legal non-conforming is the current status of the signage. I understand that. Our scope of work is going to include just one of the cabinets. I don't want to drive these sizes again because we spent so much time on the existing nature of the sign as it is. But 4.5 by 8 feet 4 inches. So if the new cabinet is approved, it will be changing in size by no more, no less. The problem is that conducting any work on that sign is going to bring it out of that non-conforming status. So as a result, if we change anything status quo about the signage, it's going to result in a whole new reconsideration of the product, and we'll have to bring down the size to 10 feet. I can assure you that alone, removing that sign would be substantially expensive, right? Even more than any cabinet we could sell them. Even if it was digital, removing that sign would be to the tune of just under $10,000 probably. The client, my customer in this case, is looking at the expense of what we're ultimately would be just in the $2,000-3,000 range. If new signage, if a new monument sign had to be erected, it would result in anything to the tune of $10,000 to $20,000. If anybody can consider that a burden, please do. It's significantly more expensive to anybody that changes any part of that signage. The cabinet needs to post for at least 3 businesses. So currently, the panel sign that's posted, non-illuminated, only represents about 2 of the brands there, an empty lease space and I believe a daycare. Current vendors that need to be represented on the signage need to include, looks like a daycare, stereo shop, and a construction company. Okay, as of right now, we're missing 1 brand that's being represented on the street. The sign that I have proposed here is partitioned by 1.5-inch retainers, but ultimately is just a single cabinet. The only partition really is cut polycarbonate faces. If we can't conduct work on the signage, if I can't install a new cabinet, which includes LED efficient light bulbs, if I can't include a cabinet which has nice, polycarbonate brand new faces, then we're gonna have to maintain status quo. Whereas face changes can be performed on the existing cabinets, I can't install a new cabinet. So that means we'd have a non-illuminated face, a panel sign that's lit by goosenecks, the current goosenecks that exist on it. Maintaining status quo would mean that we're going to have a dated cabinet maintained on the site, lit by like an old lighting method. When the sign went up sometime in the 70s, it was fine. As of right now, I understand it's a monstrosity, but it's got another 10 to 20 years of life on it. And I would say that the other signs in the region probably do as well. And you know that the property owners have every incentive to maintain those signs because they don't want to lose their sizes. So whereas we can speculate that maybe in the next decade, surrounding properties will become compliant, I can't say within 15 years that would actually be the case. So we'll see if the neighborhood converts, but as of right now, I'm just trying to provide a better looking product, visibility for an existing brand that does not have it, and more efficient, new updated product. So if any questions, please just direct them towards me. I'm here. But as of that, that's pretty much our argument.
Okay, thank you. Is there anyone else to speak in favor? Please. You state your name and address, please.
Yes, David Biddle, 8950 Old Legend Court, Montgomery, Ohio, 45249, and I'm the property owner.
Thank you.
I want to just make one correction. There's actually that section of the sign is for 3 tenants, and it always has been for 3 tenants. So it's but what we were looking at, rather than just doing, because we've typically done fascia changes on that, what I wanted to look at is to just replace what we have, no larger or smaller, and just make it look better. So it was, rather than just continue to do the fascia changes on the existing sign. So we're not increasing the size or decreasing the size. We're just making it look better and making it LED on the inside. It's not going to be an LED sign, right? So it's and the sign was put in the mid-70s when it was approved originally. So as far as the other non-conforming banners, I've always told the tenants that they had to get temporary permits for any type of signage that they put out that's not a part of the signage that I actually provide. So I would assume if those are illegal, which I believe you said that they're illegal, those tenants should be sent letters and just told to take those down.
You're the owner, so you would be responsible for the property.
Okay, all right. So is that something that should be, because I've never received a letter that those are illegal?
So we need to send him a letter, because he's the owner, he's responsible for his property.
I mean, we can skip the letter, we can assure you that any illegal postings can be removed.
Yeah, I can, you know,
That's contingent on tonight's approval. Those
Yes.
banners can be sent down tomorrow.
so it's,
Simple as that.
the thing is, again, we haven't been given any information that they were, so, but that's all I have to say.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else speak in favor? Anyone else speak in opposition? Please.
My name is Greg Tillmeyer, and I live at 7767 Colerain Avenue, but I own the property at 7765, which is the bicycle shop, which she indicated earlier with the signage. You talk about money, I had to spend $14,000 to get that sign up to code. I didn't mind spending the money because I know that that south end of Colerain Avenue, which I've been there for 40 years with my business, needs to be improved. And as you could tell from the pictures, it's a rat hole down there. You've got Duke coming in across the street, which will meet all the new standards, building codes and everything else, and they're trying to build that up. I can't understand why somebody would not have to meet code when all the rest of us have to meet it. And just because it's an older sign. And as you could tell from the pawn shop area in there, all the banners that are there, it's very distracting for our business. I mean, we sell bicycles, and they're not Walmart type bikes. We sell bikes that are up in the $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 range. And our customers that come in, I make an extra effort to keep our property clean. I made an effort to replace a fence between the Biddle's property and my property to make it look nicer because the other fence was falling down. And I put a lot of effort into that. And that place next door over there, as you could see, it's a flea market full of signs. So I can't understand why anything like that would, he's worried about the money. Well, I'm just a small business guy. And I had to fork out $14,000 to meet code, but it was worth it to me because I want that end of Colerain, which I've been there for 40 years, to improve and bring more people down that way. And I know that Colerain is working on that, and it's been a very slow process. But Arby's changed their place down there. They had to meet the code. Their stuff was all changed, and I don't see why there should be any exception to the rule in this case. And there again, when you said the landlord is responsible for this, I hollered out amen, because a lot of times all I hear from property owners is, well, I got a triple net lease with the place and that's their responsibility. No, it's not. The people that own the property, it's their responsibility. And I appreciate you for saying that to him. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else to speak either in favor or in opposition? If not, I'll entertain a motion to close the public portion of the hearing.
So moved.
Second?
Motion's been made and seconded. Roll call vote, please.
Ms. Wilson?
Aye.
Mr. Bartold?
Yes.
Mr. Roberto?
Yes.
Mr. Reiniger?
Aye. Questions from the board? We'll start with Mr. Roberto.
I'm looking at the sign. I guess the sign manufacturer or the owner, whoever wants to come up to the podium, if you both want to come up, that'd be fine too. What's to prevent you from removing the big gargantuan Cash America pawn sign, which would bring your height into code, and then just changing your panels so that you can then do multiple? It looks like you could at least get 4 tenants in the same, the cabinet you're proposing at the bottom, you're gonna have 2 tenants recognized there. And you could do the same thing with payday loans. You could do 2 tenants in that space and be in compliance.
currently, Cash America controls the top two signs.
You're the property owner, so you
Well,
again, dictate that in your
in
lease.
their lease, okay, those two signs were a part, in fact, they've been in there, I guess, 23 years now, and they're in there for a long time after that, but but those two signs were imperative when they came in and originally leased those, that they wanted to maintain those two signs. That's why, so it's not even if I'd wanted to at this point in time, I'd end up losing a tenant over, taking those two signs down, so that's not an option on my end.
Existing steel also still exceeds 10 feet.
No, it's 15 feet.
What?
It's 15 is what the code says.
The overall height allowance? Okay, excuse me.
So, I mean,
We may
if
go
you
with
took
that.
that off, you certainly would be within compliance.
I can't verify that. I don't remember. I don't
Well,
recall the height
we
of
know
the
that panel's at least not 2 feet, it's more than 2 feet.
What?
The top panel, and you're only out of compliance at 17 feet is where you're at. So if you
Each one
took,
of these panels are 5 feet 5 feet in height. That's 10 feet, just representative there. It may be 16 to 17, maybe 18 feet of steel.
well, we were talking, the overall height was measured at 17 feet. Did I read it incorrectly?
That's an approximate height.
Okay, so if we took the top panel off, you're certainly gonna be within the 10 feet parameter.
It's allowed to be 15 feet.
What's that?
It's allowed to be 15 feet, right?
Exactly, so it would be within the parameter if that top panel came off, is what I'm suggesting.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
So, but, now he's saying that his lease is not gonna allow him to do that. That then creates that hardship on him to do that. But if you wanna get it here's what hear what I'm saying. If you want to do this change, that's what I'm recommending. So you're gonna have to figure it out with your tenant, go back to your lease and look at it, how you would address it. But if you want your sign changed, that's the only way that I'm gonna approve it. And it would meet at least one part of the code of bringing in the height. You were still too close to the road, but now we're not making you move it, at least in my proposal. And then you can update it because you're gonna do panel changes anyway, and you're gonna make the LED lights that you're suggesting, and it'll look at least better than this billboard that we have that we're trying to get rid of down Colerain Avenue. That's my compromise, so that's all I'll say. We'll let the rest of the board talk about it.
Ms. Wilson?
No questions. Well, my thought was different than yours, but the red payday loan sign, that's not really advertising anybody's business. It's just a comment. So my thought was, could that go away and your new panel cabinet go in its place?
Sure.
It doesn't address, Mr. Roberto's comments, but that would be something I'd be willing to look at.
Perform a phase change, but we could not perform a cabinet change without conducting new work on a legal non-conforming.
Well, we still need variances, but I'm just saying, that red payday loans part of the sign doesn't advertise anybody's business. It's just a comment that, I guess, stop here for payday loans, but,
Yeah, I agree with you. It's, again, they control those two panels. So
Yeah.
it's kind of and the other panel are controlled by the three tenants in the rear. So
Yeah.
it's,
but I do agree what you're trying to do is making the existing sign look better and less cluttered. So I don't know since you have this lease, I don't know if this is a tabled item that you need to talk to them and come back, or if you want us to just vote on it. But that's all I have.
Okay. My comments for the owner and the sign company are, first, we have a sign that's 240% larger than anything we permit within zoning. That's not just a little tweak, that is a massive amount of space. The setback is defined by the leading edge of the upper sign. And if that upper sign is removed, the setback is going to be a lot closer to the 10 feet, closer to the pylon. I think it's notable that you're going to improve the signage. I personally would like to see the clutter reduced and have it efficient. Payday Loans is not the name of a company. It's a statement of service, I believe. Anyway, so we're dealing with size and setback. We can resolve one, other than tear it down and do a monument sign, which is also an option. But if we come to a middle ground, that would get our size down, you get our setback pushed real close, and give us a better-looking bill advertisement. At this point, I'll have to ask for a motion from the board to approve or deny the request for variance unless there is a request to table it and come back with an alternative.
I suggest we ask the applicant if he's willing to table it, and it's up to his prerogative if he wants to have a resolution tonight or if he wants to.
I think it's best really to deny it at this point and just let us continue to do our fascia changes as we've done in the past.
And then I will make a motion to deny the variance as written.
Okay, the motion's been made tonight. Is there a second?
Second.
Ms. Wilson, discussion? If not, roll call vote, please.
Ms. Wilson,
Aye.
Mr. Bartold,
Yes.
Mr. Roberto,
Aye.
Mr. Reiniger.
Aye. Okay, the motion is denied. The next case before us is BZA 2018-010. It's a request for variance to redevelop the property as a new auto sales facility. And the variances are from section 8.3.1, section 8.3.1 again, 13, section 13.3.2, 13.3.4.2, bracket D, section 14.6.1, section 14.6.2, bracket A, section 13.4.1, section 15.5.1, and section 13.4.2, bracket C. The location is 10140 Colerain Avenue. The applicant owner is Mike Koeninger and Louis Zettler. And staff presentation, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A quick note on your staff summary, in the titling language there, we had titled this, the variance request, room addition setback. That is not what we're going to be hearing tonight. It's going to be, obviously, the site redevelopment for 10140 Colerain Avenue, also known as the Car Connection. The location, the property is 0.33 acres, located north of 275 and east of Colerain Avenue, just south of the Colerain Town Center. It is currently zoned B-2, which does allow for the use of auto sales on this property. Within the last several years, the state of Ohio has widened the roadway, compensating the property owner for 0.07 acres, so 7/100ths of an acre, which reduced the property from 0.4 acres to 0.33 acres. The property was utilized as a BP gas station from the 1980s until the mid-2000s. This picture is from 1994. Again, in the mid-2000s, the property was then turned into a used auto sales facility, which is allowed per the zoning code. That use is allowed. This is a view of the property across Colerain Avenue looking eastward, and then across the property looking northwestern into the site. Staff would like to comment a couple of things before we get into the development plan itself. The applicant contends that the township has been responsible for the roadway widening project and that impacted their site, and therefore that the township has caused the site to lose its non-conforming status. This is not accurate. The triggering event for a potential loss of a legal non-conforming status is that the applicant's electing to demolish the existing structures and redevelop the site. It appears that the former gas station is no longer meeting their needs. The applicant can continue to operate their existing business as is. They are a legal, non-conforming use of the property at this time. The site was a non-conforming lot at 0.4 acres, so under that minimum 1 acre development size. The site was non-conforming in 2009 when Mr. Zettler purchased the property. The applicant is proposing to demolish the existing buildings and canopy to construct a new sales facility, proposing just over 2,300 just over a 2,300 square foot building with 6 parking spaces. A zoning certificate was denied for both missing information and failure to meet specific zoning requirements. Floor plans on the site show an exterior dimension of 2,325 square feet. There's a little bit of confusion because the plans actually noted a floor area of 1,451 square feet, and then the application letter stated a size of 1,929 feet. So staff, for the calculations on this, for the zoning certificate application, used the size of 2,325 square feet, which was what was calculated based on the drawings that were sent in to us. The applicant is proposing elevation drawings. As you see on the screen, they do appear to meet the architectural design standards of the zoning resolution for the newly proposed building. As noted before, minimum lot size requirement in a B2 zone is 1 acre. The plan is indicating a lot area of 0.33 acres. So the variance requested is for 0.67 acre reduction from the minimum lot area. Again, prior to the roadway widening, the lot was 0.4 acres, so the request would have still needed to be for 0.6 acre reduction in the minimum lot area requirement for the redevelopment of this site. Maximum lot covered by impervious surface is allowed to be 75%. The site indicates a lot coverage of 87%, so the applicant is requesting that an additional 12% of the site be covered with impervious materials. Parking requirements. The code states that there are 10 parking spaces required for each 1,000 square feet of building area, and then 2 spaces for each service bay. With all the calculations on this site, the required number of off-street parking spaces, exclusive of auto display sales, would be 20 spaces. 6 spaces are proposed by the applicant, which is a variance request for a 14-space reduction in required number of spaces. The minimum setback for parking spaces on entries perpendicular to the right-of-way is 30 feet. You can see that designated by those yellow bars on the site near those red arrows, those entryway arrows. The actual setback on the north and south property lines is about 18 feet. I'm sorry, not about, it is 18 feet. The variance request is for a 12-foot reduction in the setback for the perpendicular parking. Highlighted in yellow and green there, pointed out by the red arrows, is a minimum area for landscaping of parking area, which is required to be 15% of the total area. There is no internal landscaping proposed, so the variance request is for the elimination of this requirement. A landscape island is required at the end of each row of parking, including the parking along the street frontage. None are proposed. The variance request is for the elimination of this requirement. The code also requires that the parking area have a 15-foot setback from the right-of-way, and that setback include landscaping. No setback of the parking from the right-of-way is proposed, so the variance request is for the elimination of this requirement. And the code also requires a pedestrian connection between the building customer entry and the public sidewalk along Colerain Avenue. None is proposed. The variance request is for the elimination of this requirement. You can see that illustrated in white there, white dashed lines between Colerain Avenue and the proposed entrance to the building. There was some missing information. So staff's assumption would be that the applicant would provide these items and meet the code prior to a zoning certificate being issued on the site. There were 6 items that were articulated in the first page of your staff summary. Those included site landscaping and buffering, exterior lighting, equipment, outbuildings, dumpster locations, etc., that would be visible on the site, proposed site drainage, a legal description for easements and other site restrictions, and then parking and loading configurations for the site. Staff finds that the property in question would likely yield a reasonable return without the variance. The site can continue to be used for auto sales in its current condition as a non-conforming development. The property can reasonably be used as a permitted use in the B2 General Business District without the limits of, within the limits of the zoning regulations. The variance requested are substantial since allowance for landscaping, permeable surfaces, and good parking configuration are highly desirable for new developments. The granting of the variance would grant a consideration that is not available to other property owners in the neighborhood. The granting of the variance would probably have a negative impact on neighboring property and would create a precedent to allow for other variances if requested by neighboring properties. Approval of the variance would not affect the delivery of government services. There are no topographic issues related to this property, which would constrain the reasonable application of the regulations without additional expenses. And by taking into consideration the benefit to the applicant if the variances are granted is weighed against the potential detriment to the health, safety, and welfare of the neighborhood and broader community, staff finds that substantial justice would be done by not granting the variances for the proposed auto sales facility. Staff is recommending denial of all of the variance requests. I'd be happy to answer any questions the board might have of staff at this time.
Thank you. Are there immediate questions by the board to the staff?
Just one. On 13.42C, the sidewalk connection or pedestrian, if it is proposed to be all asphalt from the front door to the sidewalk, does that meet that requirement?
It would need to be designated.
Just with
So-
striping?
Striping would work, yes.
Thanks.
Any other questions from the board at this point? No. Okay, is there someone here to represent this case?
Good evening.
Good evening.
My name is C. Francis Barrett. I'm an attorney with the law firm of Barrett and Weber. My address is 1201 Mercantile Center, 120 East 4th Street, Cincinnati, Ohio 45202. I'm the attorney for Mr. Louis Zettler, who's the owner of this property at 10140 Colerain Avenue. And with me this evening is the architect and site planning consultant, Mr. Mark Kenninger, who I think is referenced as possibly the applicant or the agent for the applicant in the submission. Also with us this evening, joining us, is Mr. Michael Heil from the Ohio Attorney General's office, who is responsible for the ODOT appropriation of this property. Am I permitted to ask any questions of staff?
Yeah, I believe, well, let's, depends on what the question is. What's your specific
I have
concern?
a lot of questions, but the first question I'd like to ask is, I want to clarify something. Ms. LeCount indicated that the applicant contends that the township is responsible, and I'm not sure where that came from, what the source of that is.
Came from the application letter.
If I understood your question correctly, you are asking for a clarification on the township's role in relation to the development of Colerain Avenue by ODOT?
Yes and no. I mean, the staff report seemed to suggest in a negative fashion that somehow the applicant was blaming the township for what happened here, and that's not our position at all.
It's, if you read your letter, it's in number 5, and you affirm that the need for a variance is not a result of the applicant owner's action. The car connection site did not have zoning issues or hardship, and that the property was altered by the roadway project between ODOT and Colerain Township. So you're blaming both ODOT and Colerain Township for the alterations of the property.
We're not blaming anybody.
Well, that's exactly what that says there. That's how I interpret it.
First full paragraph on the first page also alludes to that.
Well, I think the point was that ODOT worked with the township as far as the highway improvements.
ODOT does not work with Colerain Township. ODOT does whatever ODOT wants to do on ODOT's property.
It was our understanding, I can stand corrected, but it was our understanding that there was cooperation between the township and ODOT.
Okay, so now you're doing the same alluding. You're alluding, but you're not providing any evidence to that effect, so stop alluding.
I'll let Mr. Heil speak for ODOT.
That'd be great, thank you.
Also, I'd like to ask Ms. LeCount, wouldn't you agree that it'd be a safer site as proposed than presently exists?
It's an opinion that she's not, it's the board that's making this decision, not her. She's following the guidelines of the board. Talk to us.
I'm allowed to ask her the question, I think.
It's
unless-
it's not a question for her to answer. She's already given her opinion on the matter.
I'm allowed to
and
ask
staff
her, I'm
recommendation.
allowed to ask her if she believes it wouldn't be safer.
Not if we don't grant it. So we're telling you no. That's not a question you're
Then
gonna
note
give to
my-
the
then
board.
note my objection.
Let's continue the presentation, sir.
I should have the right to cross-examine her, but since I'm denied, just note my objection, please, for the record.
There's no cross-examining that, in this particular case.
Let's just do your,
Exactly, it's presenting your
You
case.
can present your case if the board has a question that they want staff to answer. I don't believe that.
I have the
there's no
right to cross-examine, and if you deny it, I just note my objection and I'll proceed.
Fair enough.
The reason we are here is because of this appropriation. That's the only reason we're here. We would prefer not to be here. But because of the widening of Colerain Avenue, it reduced the functionality of the site, the safety of the site, and the value of the site. So when we were in the appropriation case, the court referred us to mediation, to the Common Police Court mediation. And as a result of the mediation, there was efforts undertaken to see what could be done to mitigate the impacts on this site. And after further consultation, the property owner retained the site planner, the architectural consultant, Mr. Kenninger, and it was suggested that maybe if the site could be redesigned, the site could function more safely, more efficiently, and more beneficially, and actually more visually attractive. So he proceeded, we actually had a number of meetings with the staff. I know Mr. Solman was present a number of times. Township administrator was present, township planner was present, representatives from the owner, ODOT were present. And we tried to see if we couldn't come up with a redesign, a redevelopment of the site that would make the site, as I said, more attractive, safer, better functioning, and more visually pleasing to the entire neighborhood. So as a result of that, Mr. Kenninger prepared the plans and drawings which we're going to submit. Obviously, there are a lot of variances that are involved, but they're all a function really of the smallness of the site. I hope you would just focus on not the number of variances or the specifics of the variances, but the general overall impact. Namely, is this going to be a better situation in the after situation than it is now? It will be safer, will be more attractive, better functioning, and better for the township. So having said that, I'd like to ask Mr. Kenninger to come up here and explain the plans if he may.
thank you.
I'm going to ask, I'm going to bring up, you did. Got it. Mark, you want to come up here and introduce yourself, please?
My name is Mark Kenninger. I'm the owner of KPS Architecture and Landscape in Fairfield, Ohio, 4535 Port Union Road. I'm here as the architect for Louis Zettler and the Car Connections. And I'm going to walk through the plans. I'd also like to walk through the slides as they presented them. I think it was a great presentation. I'd like to answer those one by one. And in doing that, I'm going to present a slightly different narrative because one, I don't think we're that far apart actually on the project once you accept two things. One, as Mr. Barrett stated, it's a small site. It was a small site before they came in and did the roadway project. It's a smaller site afterwards. And two, it's a better site afterwards. And I disagree with a number of the ways that the staff presented the nature of the site and the hardships that were placed upon the site, but I'll talk those one by one as we go through the different slides. So I will refer to this drawing first, and then if we can take yours back to the beginning, I'll go through those one by one. You do not have this drawing.
Okay.
So this is, thank you. You do not have this drawing, but this is an actual, this is the site before the roadway project. And there's two key things here besides some dimensions I'll show you. This dash line right here represents the right-of-way. This is the right-of-way before the project. This is the right-of-way after the project. And as you may know, when they did the roadway project, the right-of-way was moved 25.47 feet onto the Zettler property. And going back even a little further, the BP site was sold actually sold to the doghouse business behind, which I'm not sure if that still exists yet or not. This property sat vacant for 2 years. It was a blighted, vacant property for 2 years. Mr. Zephyr came in, and not on his own, like any business. He had to present plans. Pretty sure he presented sign plans that were approved, a site plan that was approved. When this went from a gas station to an office building, that was a permit that was approved. So his being there was not something that was forced on Colerain Township. It's a business that was approved to be and operate where it is. And it operated for 6 years, very successfully. This is one of his best locations. He does a tremendous business out of here. He turned it into a nice site. Yeah, it's still a former BP. It's a clean site. It's a good business. And he wants to continue a good business. He did not invite this. And to be quite honest, when you read some of their comments, they make it seem almost as though, you know, this was his fault that this happened, and I disagree with that. So 2009 through the start of the project, we have a successful business. The roadway project comes in, and they take away 25 feet of their frontage. The way this business is now, this site right now, we have 25 feet of frontage that's lost. We have steel columns right here that remain from the canopy. These steel columns, and you showed it in one of your pictures, as you pull in from Colerain Avenue right now, that column is 15 feet in front of the right-of-way. If you would come in there at night, he's had people, actually, before they took the concrete away from around those, he had people damage their rims because they came in and hit the concrete that used to be around those steel columns. They're right in front of the entry. They're 15 feet in front of the right-of-way. Name one other business that is forced to operate with a steel column 15 feet in the middle of their entryway. The way this site is today, it does not have legal, safe circulation around the site. There's 15 feet, as I said before, between the right-of-way and these steel columns. The minimum one-way circulation aisle, minimum, is 18 feet. So right now, legally, he cannot even get from one side of his property to another without coming around the back, and then you have issues if there's cars parked back there. He can't use the site for its intended purpose. Yes, there's cars there. Yes, they're selling cars. But if you applied your own rules to the site today, it's illegal. It's not safe. I was going to say an ambulance, but an EMT, and you mentioned that it serves all government services today. Again, I'm getting ahead of myself, but it doesn't. A fire truck certainly could not pull in here. An ambulance or a paramedic, that's the word I was looking for, a paramedic vehicle could not pull in here, circulate on the site, and leave without backing out, which again is illegal and unsafe. So he's not redoing this building to boost his business. He's not redoing this building because, you know, he wants to do a different building. He can't operate. It's not safe. His business is off by over 30%. The only reason he's still here is because he's hanging on to this mediation, or he's hanging on to Colerain Township granting these variances so he can operate like he did before. And that's what it's coming down to, Mr. Zephyr. He wants to do business. He can't do it without curing this site. So the site plans that we presented are not a grand plan of his. It's a cure to the problems he has and to make his business operational. So if you wouldn't mind going back to the start of your variances and so forth, I'll answer those one by one. Because as I said before, if you look at this reasonably, we're really not that far apart on a number of items. Now, obviously, it's nowhere close to a 1 acre site. It wasn't a 1 acre site beforehand. but this wouldn't be an issue. And to say that he doesn't have hardships and that these hardships were not placed on him by whomever, Colerain Township, ODOT, you know, I'm not gonna argue that point. But he's in the middle here. You know, these hardships were placed on him by this roadway. It was a 0.4 acre site before. It was a 0.4 acre site when you allowed the business to come in to begin with. He was operating successfully. So now how can we make this site work with the hardships that have been put on it? So if we go to the next one. Lot coverage. He is using the entire site. He has to use the entire site to get even close to the parking that's requested, to provide the circulation that's needed, and to place the building where it is in the rear there and be able to get cars in and out of it. We do exceed the 75%, and there's not going to be a way that we can get around that. Even this site plan is still has 30% less auto display area than he had before the take. So this is the best scenario that we can get on the property as it is. But again, we're only 12% off, and it does show impervious material. To be honest, we didn't bother getting into storm water because most of it's going to sheet drain off. Permeable material is not out of the question. It's something we could look at. That's usually a huge cost, but it's something that we could look at if we can work on these other items. So the next one. Parking. The difference on the parking, one, they're calling the interior bays service bays. And they're service bays in that you pull a car in, but they don't do any work on their cars there. That bay is so that they can pull a car in and, you know, they'll add Bluetooth or they'll wash the car or something like that, but it's not a mechanic's bay. So when I looked at the floor area, I did not count that as a service bay, and I did not count, which you typically wouldn't, closets, restrooms, mechanical rooms, electrical rooms, pump rooms. There's that whole center core. Just refer to this because it's probably easier to see. This whole center core here is service space. You have a 2-office building, and granted it is 2,300 square feet, but that's if you measure to the outside walls and its floor area. So I measured to the inside walls. I took the service spaces out, but all of that aside, the formulas that they're using are the same formulas they use for Performance Toyota, for these other massive car showrooms. This is a 2-person operation. Before the take, they had 4 parking spaces for customers and their staff. They never have more than 2 people in there. Now we could work, I've got 6 parking spaces there now, which is 2 more than they had beforehand. Square footage aside, I know a lot of times on churches or specialty buildings, you can work the fire department and you can look at who are the actual users in the building, how many are there, and they'll set the parking based on the actual number of users. I think if you look at this practically, a 2-office car showroom on a 3rd-acre lot does not need 20 parking spaces. I'm sure he'd love to think that he's going to have 20 customers in there at a given time, but it's not a practical application of this site. I came up with 6 actually based on the square footage that I calculated. It gives them more than they had before. The next item. The 30 feet. And I absolutely agree with you. That 30 feet is a safety measure. They want a 30-foot offset from the entry for any cross traffic and any parking. It's to keep incoming cars away from site traffic. It's a safety issue. But that's exactly why, I'll go back to the beginning, why we're doing this now. Because right now, when you pull in, within 15 feet from the right-of-way, you've got a steel column right here. Over here, you've got a steel column right here. you have 15 feet. As I spoke before, it's not a functional safe site. We could, I don't like to do it, but we could take this parking, if we're able to work on some of these other issues, and we could put this parking along the front of the building. It's not great retail design. There's some functional issues with it, but we could move that parking to the building, and that would satisfy your 30-foot offset requirement. So out of the 8 items you mentioned, I'm gonna nail down 4 of them to where there's a reasonable consideration or solution to them. Maybe 5 if we're having a good evening. You wanna go to the next one, please? Landscaping and landscape islands. I would say the entire property is the parking lot. If you take a strict definition of the parking lot, we don't meet that 15%. But really, the entire site is basically the parking lot. We added landscape here, and I don't understand why they say we didn't show landscape or landscaping. I have planting details, I have species called out on all the trees on my drawings. I show landscape here, I show landscape here. We've got landscape that we put all around the building. This is gonna be a very, very nice building. There's landscape everywhere. If you look at this as an entire site, and if you look at the green area that is around it, the landscape that we did add, there's actually 13% coverage. So now we're at a 2% difference. I'd call that pretty good on this site. Next item. The landscape islands. Well, one, that's totally impractical here as far as where they're showing them. Obviously, if we make these landscape islands, there's no way for the display cars to get in here. If we put landscape islands here, again, now we're taking away more space. We're making the circulation more difficult. Can you get them in there? I could get landscape islands in there, but now I don't, I'm gonna lose a parking space. So now we're down from 6 parking spaces to 5 or 4. And big retail parking spaces all the time. I've done 200,000 square foot retail areas. You put islands all over the place to break up the parking, to allow landscape, to provide aesthetics. It's a 3rd-acre lot. We've got 6 parking spaces, and we're gonna waste space on parking islands. It's just not a practical application. Next item. The 15-foot buffer. We had a 15-foot buffer before the tape. We don't have the luxury of space for a 15-foot buffer. Do we want parking? Do we want circulation? Or do we want the buffer? If this buffer goes in and the parking's over here, an auto sales business has no display in the front of their lot. It's not gonna fit on this site. We did squeeze in landscape here and here. I know that's not a 15-foot buffer, but unfortunately on this one, there's just no way to fit it in. Next item. Thank you for working those slides, by the way. You made a great point about the pedestrian connection. It's an all asphalt lot. If it comes down to it and we need to paint lines around here, somewhere indicating a walkway, I guess we could do that. Again, this is something that's meant for a much larger lot. We've done it on retail areas or large church parking lots. It's just, the strict application just does not seem practical here. If we, we could paint lines somewhere if that's what you wanted, but it just seems a little impractical. Next item.
So you're missing information.
Granted, we didn't show dumpsters. They don't use a dumpster. There were a couple other items that you said were missing. We're just not proposing them. Stormwater, I did not have stormwater on there. Right now, the whole property sheet drains to the back where there's Right now, the existing property sheet drains back to here, there's a hill, and there's storm drainage back here that collects all the storm water. So I was proposing the same thing to happen afterwards, which is for the property to sheet drain, and there's a swale that goes along this way. As I said, if you're interested in permeable paving, I know what that is, it's a big thing now. It's expensive, it allows the stormwater to literally drain through the pavement, and it collects underground and takes it off-site. That would be a huge expense for a lot of this size. But other than that, it'll sheet drain as it did before. Landscaping, I called out the plants, I showed where they were going. Lighting, I had photometrics on there, there's lighting on the building. I'm not sure what was missing there, but those are kind of minor items at this point, I think. So next item.
That was all there was?
Pardon?
That was all there was?
All right, then, on some of the staff comments, if I may. I thought you had a slide that listed those up there. The staff finds, he said the property in question is likely to yield a reasonable turn without the variances. The property is dying. The guy, he either needs to pull out or he needs to fix it. His business has been off over 30%, and that was after the construction project. That's not taking into account what he lost while they were actually building it across the driveway. Today, he's operating more than 30% less in sales than he did before the project. Even moving cars around on his site, it's dysfunctional because he has to move the cars out of the frontage. He only has spot for 4 cars. And if you look in their pictures, it's a Geo, a little Hyundai, whatever. It's the smallest cars he's got, because that's all he can fit in there. He has to move those cars just to be able to move the vehicle from one site to the other. It's not functioning as a car lot, and it's killing the sales. So I strongly disagree that I know what your definition of reasonable return is, but his is making a profit or selling more than he was before, and he's not. There are some of the variances that are substantial, going from an acre down to a 1/3 acre. Obviously, that is a change. But it's not much of a change from what it was before, and with some work together and some compromise, I think we can make this site work. And if I say so myself, as you saw some of the buildings, pictures of the building, it's going to be a beautiful building. Anywhere. Your prints look better than mine. These are a little dark. It's going to be a very nice building. He's spending $300,000 on this building. He wants it to be nice. If he's going to do it, he wants it nice. So it'll be a good addition. Thank you. Yeah, that's more truer to the material and the color scheme. I don't. So as far as granting the variances, we grant a consideration that is not available to other property owners in the neighborhood. Even with Mike Kyle here, I'm going to say this property was damaged more than any other property in this development, within this project. They're right at the front door of the widening. In addition to that, they had a left turn lane that came down in front of the property. He lost 25 foot of frontage on a property that's only 130-something feet deep. He lost almost 20% of his depth, chopped right off, and that's what he's left with afterwards. So there's some significant hardships, and I think significant, way beyond what other properties along there had to deal with. So when you're granting these variances, these hardships, it's not akin to other properties because they're not having to go through the same thing that he's having to go through. As far as a negative impact, I think it's a very positive impact. And I just base that on the layout of the site and the quality of the building that'll replace the former gas station. I think that's very obvious. And the last item would be not affect the delivery of government services. As I mentioned before, I actually think the opposite is actually true. If you don't grant these variances, it's a hindrance to government services. Because the site as it is now, you cannot pull a delivery truck, and that would include a paramedic vehicle or emergency vehicle. They cannot pull onto that site and turn around without backing out into Colerain Avenue. That's illegal. It's also unsafe. So that's a hindrance to government services, the way it is now. If it's not cured, then that will continue to exist on the site. You can't pull a fire truck on it. They can stay out on Colerain Avenue, but if an ambulance was serving someone on that property, they could not leave the site without backing out. That's unsafe and illegal. And I would agree with their other two items. So
Do you want to address those specifically? 6 and 7.
on 6 and 7, you say there are no topographic issues related to the property which could constrain the reasonable application of the regulations without additional expense. It's basically a flat site, does have a slope from front to rear, it's very minor. So I agree that that is not an issue. On 7, by taking consideration the benefit to the applicant if the variances are granted is waived against the potential detriment to the health and safety. Again, similar to number 5, I think if these variances are not granted, it's going to be more of a negative effect to the neighborhood because that property sat vacant for 2 years before Car Connections came. If Car Connections leaves, how long is it going to sit vacant this time? Versus if the variances are granted, you'll have something like that. So I think it's actually a benefit to the community and to the application of government services to grant the variances and to work with us on the other ones. I think that's it.
Mr. Kenninger, in all your years of experience in site planning and architecture, is there anything about your submission, your proposal, that would have any negative effect on any adjacent or neighboring property owner?
Not at all. As I said, I think it's going to be an improvement to the community. It actually makes it a safer site, and I can't emphasize that enough. Go out to the site and try pulling in, and you'll see what I'm talking about. And if emergency services had to go to that site, anything bigger than a paramedic truck, the back end is going to be sticking out into Colerain Avenue.
And as far as the township in general is concerned, would there be any negative impact on the township in general?
I think it would be, you're maintaining a viable business. It was a thriving business for 6 years. Architecturally, it's improving the site. Aesthetically, it's improving the site. And it'll be a business that could be viable for a number of years. I see it as a benefit.
Can you think of any single negative benefit or any negative impact on the township? Any single?
Gentlemen, if I might interrupt, I really would like the dialogue to be between the person at the podium and the board. And if Mr. Kenninger wants to add material, that's great. But please direct your dialogue this way.
Am I not allowed to ask him a question?
I would appreciate it if you would address your comments to the board.
You're making a presentation.
It's not that
It's not
type
a
of
query.
forum.
Pardon?
It's not the forum. You're making a presentation. So you're directing the board. You're not
You
directing.
told me I'm not allowed to ask him a question?
He's not saying that. He's asking you to go ahead and present him with a presentation.
The board has the option of asking questions to whoever is a presenter. And that's what I would like to continue that format because that's how we work.
And at this point, we're not even at that point. We're still in presentation mode. You guys are making presentation as to why you would want this variance granted. So it's not a dialogue between the two of you. I mean, he's made a great presentation. You make your presentation as why it should happen, and then we'll ask questions when we get to that point. But it's not question and answer time.
Denote my objection, please.
Noted.
Okay, it's, Ms. Kinninger, are you finished with your presentation?
Yes, I am. Thank you. It was a great presentation.
All
Appreciate
right,
it.
is there anyone else to speak in favor of this presentation? Your name, please?
Good day. Good evening. Michael Heil, Assistant Attorney, Assistant Attorney General, 16th floor, Carew Tower, 441 Vine Street, Cincinnati, Ohio, 45202. I represent the Ohio Department of Transportation, and it's my fault. It was my plan, ODOT's plan. We were implementing a plan with the guidelines of the Federal Highway Administration. So we probably sought input, but it was not the township. It would be ODOT's plan. Secondly, I wanted to apologize for my phone going off. I'm an old flip phone guy, just got a new one. I still can't figure out how to turn it on and off. Beyond me, I don't know how these kids do it. One simple point. I like the practical approach that you have used, and I'll use a comment that came from your staff here. You want to improve Colerain Avenue all the way down to Groesbeck, past Rumpke's Mountain. Agreed. This is going to be part of that improvement. You've got a ratty-looking operation right now that he's going to keep running as long as he can, making money until he gets to that point where he's got to walk away. This is a superior plan. It looks good. I've dealt with both Fran and Mr. Zettler. He's committed to this. During negotiations, we talked about settling with a chunk of change that will permit him to undertake part of the cost to cure and put that building up. So I would ask you to continue with your practical approach and please allow him to improve the area. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone to speak in opposition to this? I'll ask for a motion for the public portion of this presentation to be closed.
I will make a motion.
Is there a second?
Second.
The motion's been made and seconded. Roll call vote, please.
Ms. Wilson?
Aye.
Mr. Bartolt?
Yes.
Mr. Roberta?
Aye.
Mr. Reiniger?
Aye. Okay, now, questions from the board. We'll start with Mr. Roberto.
I want to commend you on the architect. Was it Mark?
Yeah.
You did a great job in the presentation and addressing all the issues. I do appreciate it, and there are some common sense things here that, you know, it just, like the islands, just it doesn't make sense. I get that, and it's going to create a hardship on some of these areas if we try to enforce that. I think the proposed building is a great plan. You know, I know we kept representing or referring back to the fact that you'd lost property. I know there was compensation for that loss of property, if I heard correctly. Did I not hear that correctly? So there was compensation, but it will never compensate for the loss of business opportunity for that extra space that you had for your car. So I get that. Can we go back to the overall overhead view of that'll work. So, I mean, you're proposing basically removing that whole conglomeration, moving it to the back edge of the property, which is going to be a better pleasing site. But some of the bigger offenses that we're having is landscaping, which is really minimal, and then setback from the road, which, in my opinion, is a liability. I know we've seen people run off the road into car dealerships. There's nothing preventing you from that happening here. The sidewalk thing is easy to overcome. I guess I really don't have any questions. It's more just my opinion of the fact of the matter. I think there are some things that we probably could overlook from a board perspective, because I do believe this will be a better site plan than what's existing. I really don't have a question for you, so it's not really a dialogue, but, you know, again, I appreciate what you've presented. I don't have any further questions.
Ms. Wilson?
Just based on the argument, and this is for either Mr. Barrett or Mr. Koeninger, whoever wants to answer the question, but I just want some clarity first. What's the reason for wanting to rebuild, to demolish and rebuild? Like, what brought this about?
Mark Kenninger. The reason for the need to rebuild is because, as that slide shows there, after the roadway project came in, the site that the owner is left with it's not safe to access. It's not functional as a car lot. It's not functional for many uses. And because the number one thing is you cannot safely enter that property. And actually, this is a great slide, if I may again. What this is showing, this is the canopy structure right here. Here's the right-of-way, 15 feet off of this structure. There's your entry. Somebody comes in here, let's say they're just doing a turnaround. They're not even buying a car. You've got a turn lane right here for the retail center. They come flying in here at night or whatever. There's a steel column right here, dead in front of you. It's not safe. So when we look at these properties, we say, that's the damage. Now, how do we cure it?
Brings me to my next question. Is there no way to remove those columns?
Remove the canopy.
Well, you could remove the canopy, but then after the canopy, you have this building that's right here. And normally, when you have a parking aisle, the minimum dimension on a one-way parking aisle with any kind of parking on it is usually 20 or 21 feet, depending on what district you're in. If there's no parking, you can go down to 18 feet. This is 15 feet. And the end of this building is just beyond this canopy.
So ideally, you could remove the canopy, right? And redirect traffic back there. Am I looking at that incorrectly?
You could redirect
Or move your cars to the back. Is that not, I mean, not all of them because you want to show them off, I understand. But just for the sake of, I mean, and because what I'm getting at is this.
No, I understand what you're saying. The one,
Thank you. Yeah.
if you did that, you can see here, the building basically goes out to the edge of the canopy. So removing the canopy, would remove that column, but it's not going to remove the circulation back and forth. And there's no cars on this lot right now. I mean, they've got a few here. I don't know when this was taken. But now, in order to get the inventory they need to sell cars, there's cars all through the back of this area now. So to have people driving around, and again, it's one thing to drive around. We know how car lots stack their cars. But it's another thing to have a legal parking aisle. If it's a one-way aisle, it's got to be at least 21 feet. And then if you're talking about an aisle where emergency vehicles are going to be able to go through there, which, you know, we're required to lay out a parking lot for emergency vehicles as well, it just doesn't work. The other thing I wanted to note, if you go back to that site plan, the area,
The one you just had previously?
the
Existing?
the aerial you had, the existing aerial.
Yeah, that's it.
The office building right here is, I'm gonna say was 800 square feet. It's a little building. The canopy, all of this together is about 2,800 square feet. So I think the other thing that's significant is if we remove this and move the building to the back, we're taking that 2,800 square feet of density and we're replacing it with 2,300 square feet. So we're actually reducing the density of the structure on the site as well. Removing the canopy does help, but you still have the obstruction of that structure and still make circulation on the property dysfunctional.
Okay, and thank you for that explanation. And what I'm getting at is, it seems that the theme here, or the theory here, is that ODOT caused some sort of hardship that would prevent you from making these changes, when in fact, even as the property was purchased, it was still under, even if the 25 feet had not been removed, you all will still be having the same problem. So
That's not correct. I'm sorry, that's not correct.
Why? It's
And how so?
under an acre.
It's
So
under
it's
an
the
acre.
Same variance.
But we would need the variances.
You would though,
Yeah,
because
you're
it's still
changing-
under
you're
an
changing the-
acre.
Let me explain it this way. If the site wasn't reduced, he wouldn't need to cure the damages that I've talked about, and he wouldn't be spending the money on this building. He could be functioning as he was before. But because the roadway project came in, and because those changes were made, he's got to do something to save his business. He's got to do something to make the site functional, and he's got to do something to make it safe. So the only reason we're proposing this building is because of the changes that were made to the site that he had no control over. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here.
But, and correct me if I'm wrong, didn't you all just say that the building as it exists is not beautiful and all those things? So it sounds like it's also just a desire to create or build a better structure, not necessarily.
sure,
It sounded more like it was about wanting to build a better structure, make it look nicer, make it look more appealing.
Well, you wouldn't want me to put up an uglier building.
No, I would
So-
not,
so
and that's not what I'm getting at.
It is a better building. I mean, if we're gonna redo it, he wants to do a nice building. That's a good thing.
No,
That's an
I agree
improvement
with
to the
that.
community.
I just
But
want
what's
to make
significant-
sure you guys understand that regardless of that 25% of 25 feet that got lost because of ODOT's construction, if you wanted to if this was all just about making a better, beautiful building, you still have to ask for a variance.
But that's not what it's about.
Okay.
Again, variances are granted because of hardship. We would not be here this evening if those hardships hadn't been imposed on Mr. Zettler. So he either has to leave, shut down and leave, or he's got to find a way to fix it. This is the fix.
Is there an alternative? But we did discuss an alternative, right? It's
Which
not,
is?
which is removing the canopy.
But that doesn't fix everything. That removes the columns, but it doesn't fix everything.
Okay.
So
I've got no more
I just-
questions.
Mr. Roberto, you have a follow-up question?
I do. Jenna, can you go back to from the ground shot you were looking at didn't we have a zoning ruling that we were supposed to be removing those two big poles as part of this project? Before this project was brought before us again?
I am not familiar with,
I know we ruled on that.
The sign?
There's the big poles right there. They're still there.
Are they gone, Fran? Yeah, they're gone. They're gone.
So this is not a most recent photo then? Okay. All right, thank you.
We took those down, you asked us to take it down, we took them down.
Thank you very much. That alarmed me when I saw this. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm not sure of an actual question, but it's the same thing. It's two competing thoughts. One is, these are substantial variances, but that's why we exist. You know, this is a very unique parcel. And on the flip side of that is, you're making a better environment. This is kind of the northern gateway off the freeway. A lot of tourists and visitors heading north right now will see not a dilapidated old gas station. You know, they fixed it up as best they could, but it is a gas station facility. So what you're doing is making it better, no doubt. And if the owner were to just get up and leave, I'm assuming per Colerain Township, nothing would ever go on this site again. Is that true or false as a building? Unless they got a lot of variances.
at the minimum, redevelopment of this site would require a variance for under 1 acre.
Yeah, as a minimum.
As a minimum, I don't know that that necessarily means that any other variances would be a requirement.
Well, yeah, it's hard to say until you know. But potentially, if he were to walk away, that could be a vacant building for years and years and years, because nobody else could come up with a way to make it work. But So, as far as MSD and stormwater, I thought they would have an issue with your stormwater going on to somebody else's property, but I don't know if you've checked into that or not, but it would be a concern, and what they would really say about it if you were to move forward, you know. So, yeah, really no questions other than it's a dilemma between what I'll call a massive amount of variances versus the greater good of putting a nicer facility on this tiny parcel.
Can I respond to that?
Yeah.
One, as far as the massive number of variances, I think we're down to the 1 acre site. That's not going to go away. We're down to the maybe the number of parking spaces, but I think there's some reasonable logic there. And the 15-foot buffer. So
Well,
I think,
No, there's more than that. There's 831, lot impervious surfaces, parking spaces, setbacks, landscaping, landscape islands. I mean, it's all in there. Those would all have to be granted.
well, those are all the variances.
Yeah.
But in some of those, I've always, already responded to. But as far as the ones you mentioned, the insurmountable, on most of those other ones, we've given solutions or possible alternate solutions. The two that we're not going to be able to resolve is the 15-foot front yard buffer and the 1 acre site. There's no way to do either one of those. The other ones, we can come up with some solutions. We may not get all the way there, but we can get really close on them. So I'm responding more to the word insurmountable, not to be
Did
particular.
I say that? I don't know. So if variances were granted, you're saying you're still willing to work with the township on tweaking things that are yet to be resolved?
If that's what it comes down to. And I also meant to respond to the stormwater question. I did not show stormwater on there. I think it's very easily resolved on a site of that size. It's catch basins and stormwater drainage. That's a matter of calculation. It's not a big deal, and we can provide that information if we go forward.
Again, that's really just thoughts at this point.
Thank you, Mr. Porter. You please be seated. I'll just offer a couple of comments. I really struggle with folks that create their own problems. The business is functioning. It's grandfathered in as a auto sales lot, and everything blossomed from the fact that there's a demolition of a building and a redefinition of how the site will be laid out. Zoning is created to give us a standard across the township where we have the ability to make an impact on new development. This looks like it's going to be a new development. I know that 1 acre is something we can't struggle with. The amount of impervious surface is a serious concern. There is plenty of asphalt in that area, and more asphalt is not helpful. That has to be met. I really commend the effort to do something different, but we're still hampered by zoning codes, which we are looking for a number of exceptions, and one or two we might be able to work with. But I'm just you're making a square peg go into a round hole, basically. I think it's a good effort, but I don't know that it is something that I can support. That being said, I will have to ask the board if there are any other questions, because I'm going to call for a motion. And then I will ask for a motion from a member of the board to either approve the denial or approve all the variances with conditions.
before we make, can I just kind of go down
Yeah.
my thoughts on this? I mean, we're not going to change the acreage. Nothing to do about that. It's 75% of lot coverage. I mean, I can wiggle on that. It's a car lot. The 10 spaces, I can wiggle on that. I agree that they're never going to have, I mean, hopefully they have more people in there buying cars, but I can wiggle on that. The setback from the 30 feet, I don't think that's realistic. Basically, the driveway would be right in the center, and that'd be it. The landscaping from the parking lot, I think there was more landscaping that wasn't probably captured in their calculations, so we're probably pretty close to that. I would agree with the 13%. The landscaping island, I think, is silly in this particular instance, because the purpose of those is to slow down traffic going through parking lots and to provide some sort of buffers. The 15-foot setback that'd be a concern that I would have. And the pedestrian thing, that's a no-brainer. Just paint a line on the ground and you can solve that problem. So really, what it comes down to me, as far as the biggest offense, that's not overcomable is the 15-foot setback from the right-of-way. So I would deny it based upon that alone, and everything else I could probably provide wiggle room with some guidance from staff on how to best approach it. But that's my feedback.
Could staff make a suggestion?
Yes, please.
From the discussion that was had between the board and the applicant, it sounds like, when the applicant was up here most recently, that the sticking point that they really struggle with is the 15-foot yard buffer and the 1 acre minimum. What I heard him say was that everything else could be worked with. Is there an opportunity for this to potentially be tabled for the applicant to attempt to work a new plan that covers the rest of those variances that we've heard tonight are not going to be an issue, and then we can talk realistically about only 2 potential variances, because I think
Personally, I think it would be to the benefit of the applicant if we allow them that opportunity, yes.
I think it's pretty clear we're not going to get away from the 1 acre minimum.
True.
But it may be more appropriate to have a realistic conversation about whether or not that is an appropriate variance once we were able to work through those other items that can be kind of taken out of this discussion.
Okay, all right. Well, then, with that comment, thank you.
I would like to make a motion, if the applicant is acceptable to that, is to table this for the next available meeting.
All right, is there a motion?
Do we want to table it just a little further, keeping in
certainly,
mind?
certainly. So they would also then bring back to staff a proposed amendment to their plan to address all the issues with the exception of the 15-foot setback is probably the only thing that you're not going to be able to address, and they can't change this.
What I heard was 1 acre minimum and 15-foot setback, so those
Correct.
2.
Yes.
I'd like to suggest, depending on, I don't know what your timeline is, but if we want to do 2 to 3 months out, give us time to meet and rework some of the plans, and then also make sure that we get the thorough review time that we did. Maybe 2 months is appropriate, maybe 3 months is, I don't know what, again, your schedule is, pending board approval, obviously.
Gentlemen, if you just come up to the front, please.
Mark Kenninger, just so I understand, and I think within that 2-3 months, that's understanding we actually have to be a month ahead in order to submit to get on your docket, correct?
Well, being tabled, no, that's not the case.
So that saves 30 days in there.
It does, correct. So I just want to make sure that we, though, have enough time to discuss it, and you can get the plans updated, and then hopefully we can also identify, get some of that missing information in there as well, so that we are that much closer to an actual zoning certificate, and we're only discussing those 2 items that really need to be discussed.
Thank you.
Okay, so a motion's on the floor.
To table,
Table.
and they're going to amend the plans with the direction of staff so that we're hoping only going to have 2 items left on this
For variances.
for variances. Is that how I heard that? Now she's confused.
I don't know how that needs to be worded, but it's my understanding that the motion would be, simply be to table with the intention of coming back to discuss
2 items,
2 items
yes. That would be
for a particular date to be named by this
Right.
board.
So we got a motion,
Second.
and we have a second. Any other discussion on the motion? All right, let's do a roll.
Table until, do you want to do October, or do you want to do November?
It's up to staff. I mean, it's, you guys want to have to work out the details.
I don't know how quickly you can turn things over. Okay, that would be October 24th.
Okay. So October the 24th.
All right, if there's no other discussion, I'll ask for a roll call vote on the motion, please.
Ms. Wilson,
Aye.
Mr. Bartold,
Yes.
Mr. Roberto,
Yes.
Mr. Reiniger.
Aye. Okay, the motion is the motion is approved. The action is tabled until the October meeting. All right, let's go on to the next item on the agenda. Folks. All right, good. Find my agenda.
We'll just talk through if you don't mind.
Okay. Gotta find my agenda. Okay. All right, the next item on the agenda is unfinished business. Do we stand, is there any, Mr. Count? Okay. Approval of minutes from June 27th, 2018.
I'll make a motion to approve the meeting notes.
Okay,
And I'll second them.
and the motion's been made and seconded. Roll call vote on that, please.
Ms. Wilson,
Aye.
Mr. Bartold,
Yes.
Mr. Roberto,
Yes.
Mr. Reiniger.
Aye. Administrative matters, then?
I feel like the answer is yes. Land Use Committee, sorry, Comprehensive Plan, Land Use Committee, we are looking for applications to fill a 7-member committee. I have asked from this board as a representative, Mr. Hill. I have not yet heard back from him. If he's unable to fill that, I will be coming back to the board to request someone else to fill that position. That is a committee that will be meeting hopefully monthly between September and April-ish of 2019 to talk about the land use plan component of the comprehensive plan.
Thank you. Then I'll ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Seconded?
Motion made, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you very much. We stand adjourned.